Well, good morning, Genesis. My name is Michael. I serve here as one of the pastors and sincerely thankful that you are taking about an hour on a Sunday morning to be with us. Whether you've been coming here for a decade plus or you've been coming here and it's only been 5 minutes, I am thankful that you are genuinely here because God has something for each of us. Wherever your current story is, I just believe you're here because God has something He wants to show you, remind you of, challenge you with, or encourage you with. Our heart as a church is we just want to do anything and everything we possibly can to help as many people as we possibly can walk with God. Today, that is a step in walking with God, and I'm thankful that you're here to experience what God has for you. Every few years, I like to just stop and ask the question, who are we? Meaning, like, who are we as a church? Now, if you've been at Genesis for some time now, I think that you would be encouraged by how the diversity of our community just continues to evolve and grow and change. And if you're maybe brand new to Genesis, I think when you hear what I'm about to share in terms of who we are, that you're going to be very encouraged about this picture of the diversity that God has gathered here. So, demographically speaking, we have people who are still in the womb. We have a person who was just born 4 days ago. Meet my friend Liam. It's good to see you guys have a heart towards 4-day-old children. We have people who have been on the planet, part of this community, for over 80 years, and we have everyone in between those numbers. Geographically speaking, we have people who have grown up in a rural setting, people who have grown up in a farming or urban, suburban, or a suburban setting. We have people who have grown up in a small to medium to large-sized towns or cities, even to a handful of people who are from New Hampshire. Ethnically speaking, we are Asian, Black, white, Hispanic. We've got people who have grown up in the U.S., people who have grown up in Brazil, Argentina, Portugal, England, Albania, the Philippines, China, Germany, Congo, Nigeria, India, Kenya, Australia, Canada, and a few people from the Caribbean, different islands in the Caribbean, and a handful from New Hampshire. Economically speaking, pretty widespread here, and this is just my best guess. I don't know people's bank accounts, but my best guess is I think we've got everything from people who have next to nothing in their bank account to people who might have millions in their bank account, and then a ton of people who are somewhere in between nothing and that. Professionally speaking, as best as I possibly know, here is a really long list of the diversity of the different professions made up in this community. Medical professionals, we've got some doctors, dentists, nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, researchers. We have some lawyers, engineers, both civil, electrical, energy, environmental, mechanical, financial side of things. We have accountants, planners, traders, analysts, bankers. We have some folks who are chemists, folks who are trainers, coaches, mechanics, machinists, architects, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, custodians, contractors, construction workers, people who would just put in the category of business professionals, sales, marketing, consultants. We have event planners, beauticians, hairstylists. We have administrators, teachers, instructors, students, childcare providers, elderly care providers, folks who work in the postal service, military. We have folks who work in the police department, computer science, folks who are IT, security, programmers, web designers. We have real estate folks, appraisers, human resources, interior design, both commercial and residential. We have artists who are photographers, graphic designers, painters, actors, musicians. We have folks in the restaurant industry, whether it's a cook, server, owner, barista. We have retail specialists. We have a flight attendant. We have mechanics, both for auto and plane. Nonprofits. We have folks in vocational ministry. We have entrepreneurs, and we have a ton of stay-at-home parents. That's over 75, and I know that doesn't represent everyone, but as best as I could recall, 75 different professions represented in this community. Geographically speaking, and this is not counting Genesis North Shore congregation. There's about 15 different towns, cities that the North Shore is reaching right now. This is just our Woburn location. So as best as I know, we have over 40 different cities and towns represented here. Acton, Amesbury, Andover, Arlington, Bedford, Boston, Brookline, Burlington, Billerica, Cambridge, Charlestown, Chelmsford, Concord, Everett, Groton, Hanscom Air Force Base, some town called Haverhill, Lexington, Lowell, Linfield, Malden, Melrose, Medford, Methuen, Middleton, Natick, North Andover, North Reading, Quincy, Reading, Somerville, Stoneham, Tewksbury, Wakefield, Waltham, Wilmington, Winchester, Watertown, and Woburn. We have folks who are coming and worshiping with us from Manchester, New Hampshire, Nashua, New Hampshire, Windham, New Hampshire, and one family from Warwick, Rhode Island. Why? When I read that, I get excited because I'm like, and that's why we want to plant as many congregations, churches as we possibly can, so that men and women aren't having to drive 20, 30, 40 minutes to come gather here, that there would be more congregations closer to them, not for the convenience factor, but for the factor of your neighbors and friends joining you. Relationally speaking, we have those who are single, and we have those in that category who are single and loving it, and we have those who are single, not a big fan of being single. We have those who are dating, those who are engaged. We have those who are married, some who have been married less than 6 months, to those who have been married nearly 60 years. We even have one couple that will celebrate 25 years of marriage this Tuesday on Valentine's Day. That would be me. We have many folks who have gone through and endured divorce, those who are remarried, and those who are widowed. Politically speaking, I'm not even sure of how many political parties exist, but from what I know exist here, we have Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, Constitution Party, and Green Party. I didn't know Green Party still existed, so I'm not sure if there's Green Party in here, but if you are Green Party, talk to me afterwards. Spiritually speaking, man, all over the place. Every background, including Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Anglican, Pentecostal, Baptist, Fundamentalist, non-denominational. We have people who've grown up in Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, and Jehovah's Witness backgrounds. We have people who have grown up their entire life in the church, and we have people here who this is the first church that they've ever walked into. We have people who have come to faith in Jesus as recent as 2 weeks ago, to people who have been walking with God for the better part of 5 decades. Again, I don't do this all that often, but I find it helpful every few years just to stop and ask the question, like, who are we? Like, as a people, as a community, who are we? And the few times that I've done this over the years that Genesis has been around, I'm always somewhat amazed with the diversity that's represented within what I think is a relatively small community in this area. Now, as I've sat with the diversity that makes up who we are as a church, I found myself asking 2 questions. Number one, are we better together? Meaning, is there something within this diverse community of men and women from so many different backgrounds that makes us better together? And without even having really to think all that hard about that question, I think the answer is a resounding yes. The unique ability that we have with the men and women that consider this place home, family, community, to help one another, to encourage one another, to learn from one another, to pour into, to challenge, to comfort one another. It's absolutely amazing. You have new marrieds, people who've only been married for 6, 12 months in the same community with a few men and women who are approaching 60 years of marriage, that they have the opportunity to pour into those couples that are still trying to figure out the newness of being married. You have new parents who are able to learn from those who are now empty nesters. And they've navigated parenting really, really well, that their kids are loving God, walking with Him, and just flourishing, able to come alongside those who are feeling a bit overwhelmed in this thing called being a mom or a dad. You have people who have been walking with God for decades who are able to pour into and pour out into those who are either newer to faith or just still trying to figure out what faith is all about. But here's the really awesome thing. It's not just the older pouring into and investing in the younger. The younger have such a phenomenal opportunity to breathe life into those who are older. Older people, and I can say this because I'm now in my 50s, older people have a way of getting stuck. Kind of like stuck in their ways, kind of just going through the motions, not like intentionally, but as you get older, that's a struggle of just being stuck. And so the youngers have an opportunity to model for the older in this community things like enthusiasm and passion and conviction and energy. So yes, to the first question, are we better together? 110% every day we are better together. Now, better together doesn't always mean it's easy, but better together is always the best way to go. Second question that I've been thinking about as I've wrestled and thought through the diversity that makes up Genesis is this question: unity amongst diversity. Like, what might happen if there was unity amongst such a diverse community of people? And again, I walked through the variations of diversity. What might happen if there was unity amongst that community? When I say unity, what if there was amongst our diversity just a shared heart, a shared direction, a shared pursuit, a shared affection that we had for one another? What message would that communicate to a very diverse but divided community and culture around us? Don't you think that people at some level would begin to ask, like, how does that work? Like, how do you have people from such different spectrums of life, different ethnic backgrounds, different social backgrounds, financial backgrounds, professional backgrounds, relational backgrounds? Like, how does that work that there is a shared heart, direction, pursuit, and affection? This past week, our president gave his State of the Union address. And in full honesty, I didn't watch it. I only went back and watched a few different clips of it. But what I did watch, I wasn't surprised by what I saw, but I was definitely saddened by what I saw. And I can sum up what I saw. And I didn't watch the whole thing, but what I saw in 2 words is division and disdain. Division and disdain. You have people that could not clap loud enough and long enough for everything that was being said. And you had other people who could not hide their contempt for the people that were clapping and cheering. You have people in that room heckling the president, and then you have people in that same room who are now heckling the hecklers who are heckling the president. At some level, I think we expect that sort of thing to happen in, political structures, but I think this is even more of the disheartening thing for me. Where there is diversity and wide spectrum of diversity, it's almost expected, and I would say even at some level accepted, that there's just going to be division and disdain. That's just the way it works. When there's diversity, there's just going to be some division. And often that division leads to a contempt for one another. But here's the really good news. Jesus shows a better way. Jesus shows a better way. 2 weeks ago, we began this series called Follow Me. And the intention and the heart behind Follow Me was very simple, that if you are one who identifies as a Christ follower, this series is all about a place where you can just check, am I following Jesus in the way that Jesus intended me to be followed, or is it something different that I'm doing? And if you're in a place where you're still trying to figure out, do you want to follow Jesus? You're trying to figure out Christianity. This series for you is all about Jesus making crystal clear what followership, according to him, actually looks like. Now, I've already painted a picture of who we are as a community. Ton of diversity across the board, but what I want to do, spend the next 15 to 20 minutes thinking about our togetherness. I want us to think for a moment just about our togetherness, because according to Jesus, if we would follow him as he intends us to follow him, we're going to do that together. There is no Lone Ranger. There is no just you and Jesus. If we're going to follow Jesus as Jesus intended to be followed, we're going to do it together. And as we're about to see in Luke chapter 6, Jesus invites a diverse group to come together. And in that diversity, we see this beautiful picture of unity. If you have a Bible, open with me to Luke chapter 6, starting at verse 12. One day, soon afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain to pray, and he prayed to God all night. Before I read on, Jesus prayed a lot. This is not new information. We know that Jesus prayed a lot. There's many times where he broke away from the crowds just to spend a time in prayer. We know that there were many mornings he got up early to pray, and we know that there were many nights he stayed up late in prayer. But Luke 6:12 is the only place where it is mentioned that Jesus pulled an all-nighter in order to pray. I'm guessing at some point in your life, you've had an all-nighter or two. I've had countless numbers of all-nighters in my life, and I honestly think that's why I'm bald. But the only reason that someone would stay up all night is because there is something so big, so significant that is going to happen the next day that you don't even have time to sleep. If you're a student, you know this. There's days where I have a paper, I have an exam, I have a project that needs to get done. I don't have time to sleep. In maybe your business world, you have a project or a presentation that needs to get done by next morning. It is so big and significant to your career. You just don't have time to sleep. You've got to make sure you nail it. Well, what was happening for Jesus the next day that he spent all night in prayer? Read with me in verse 13. At daybreak, he called together all of his disciples, and he chose 12 of them to be apostles. Here are their names. Now, before I read to you the list of names, what was the big thing? What was the such of an important thing happening that Jesus had to be up all night in prayer? Well, Jesus was putting together a team that would be entrusted to lead the way in changing the world with the world-changing message of the gospel. It was such a significant moment in the story of Christianity where Jesus specifically was calling 12 to lead the way in proclaiming and demonstrating the world-changing message of the gospel. Now, over the past 2 weeks, we've looked at Jesus inviting a few different people to follow him. We looked at Levi, who was a tax collector, also known as Matthew. The week before that, we looked at an individual named Peter and the invitation that Jesus gave to Peter to follow. But by the time we get to Luke 6, it says that there were many people who were now following Jesus. In fact, if you skipped a few chapters over to Luke chapter 10, it will tell you there were 70 individuals that are now following Jesus. But what's about to happen here in Luke 6 is Jesus is going to set aside 12 individuals amongst the many followers of Jesus who are going to lead the way. So it is by no means an overstatement to say that this is a significant moment in the soon-to-be movement of Christianity. Maybe some of you here, if you're into business things, have read or familiar with Jim Collins. Jim Collins is like an organizational leadership, like the Yoda of these things. And one of his most famous books, at least I think most famous, that he wrote is a book called Good to Great. And basically the book is how do companies go from just being like a good company to a truly great company, a company that is changing not just things around them, but literally changing the world. And probably the most memorable metaphor that Jim Collins uses in this book is you need to get the right people on the bus if you are going to go from good to great. If you're going to go from this place to this place, you need to make sure that you have the right people who are going to be leading the way. And of course, as you might imagine, the right people, those are like the go-getters. They are the driven ones, the proven ones, the high-capacity ones. They are the men and women who have the pedigree and all of the degrees to go behind their name, and they've got tons of experience. Like on paper, if you're going to take an organization from good to great, it certainly makes sense to assemble the best of the best of the best to go change things, right? Well, no knock to Jim Collins, but Jesus flips that script completely upside down. Jesus takes what we often think of who should be in leadership, and he flips that script upside down. What we're about to see is that those who Jesus calls to lead the way, some of the most ordinary and unimpressive, diverse group of people you ever met. Here's who Jesus calls to be apostles. And if you're not familiar with that language of apostle is best understood or defined as one who is sent. So here is the list of the ones who were sent to lead the way, to represent message ministry of Jesus. Read with me in verse 14. Simon, whom he named Peter, Andrew, Peter's brother, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him. All right, before we look at the diversity of this group that Jesus called to be his sent ones or his apostles, let me address what I think might be the ginormous elephant in the room. Where are the women? Like, where are the women? Why didn't Jesus call women to be apostles? We know Jesus not only broke all sorts of cultural and religious norms of the day in the way that he included and cared for women, but why didn't Jesus call women to be apostles? Is Jesus anti-women in leadership? Obviously, there's a ton of things that could be said, but let me just start with this for today. Role is never connected to value. You might know that, but I just wanted to make sure that you hear it again, that role is never connected to value, meaning the value of a person is not found in the role or title position they have. Rather, the value of a person is found in a gift that God specifically has given to all men and to all women. And the gift that he gave is his image. I realize that in our culture, roles are often equated with value, meaning you are more valuable as a person if you have a certain title next to your name. I understand that's how culture works, but that is never, and I stress never, the case with God. Value is in the image we bear. And God's word makes very clear that both male and female bear the image of God. Thus, both male and female find their equality, not in the roles that we might have, but in the image we bear. Now, I realize that might sound all well and good, but I'm guessing some of you are thinking, dude, you didn't answer the question. Why didn't Jesus call women to be apostles? Why not 6 men, 6 women? That seems like a much more diverse group than 12 men. Again, not trying to give candy answer, but I think we need to ask a different question. And I think the different question would be this: what was Jesus trying to accomplish in the calling of apostles or calling of sent ones? We know he didn't call women, but we also know that Jesus did not call any Gentiles. We also know that Jesus didn't call any non-Jewish people. That's what a Gentile is. If you're not Jewish, you're a Gentile. So we either need to conclude that Jesus is anti-women and anti-Gentile, meaning all of us being in positions of leadership, or we need to conclude that Jesus was seeking to accomplish something very, very different and unique. In this moment in Luke 6, the calling of the 12 apostles, Jesus is not making so much a statement on leadership as he is making a statement on a new people that God is forming and bringing together. And what Jesus does with calling 12 apostles is to reflect something that Jewish people would know very well, the symbolism of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so what Jesus is doing is trying to help people understand a new people of God is getting formed. And to be true to the symbolism that Jesus is doing, it of course would have to be men. To be clear, more could be said on this, but I don't want anyone walking away thinking that somehow Jesus is anti-women or anti-Gentile, which would be all of us, in positions of leadership. This is not a passage about gender roles within the church. Rather, this is a beautiful picture that Jesus is doing something new, a new people, a new message, a new ministry that will be not just for some people, but will be for all people. That being said, as you consider this list of names Jesus calls to serve as apostles, I'm guessing some of those names sound really, really familiar to you, and there's other names you're like, I didn't know that guy was an apostle. But one of the things that the people in the first century would have recognized immediately is they would be like, wow, that's a pretty diverse group of people Jesus called. Pretty diverse group of people. Probably the most shocking in this group of people would be Jesus inviting Levi, otherwise known as Matthew, and inviting Simon, the nickname, the Zealot. Now, we looked at Levi last week. Levi worked for Rome. He was a very disreputable, actually hated tax collector who upcharged his own people just to make a buck. And if you are not familiar with the Zealots are a political party who were passionately opposed to all things Rome. So in any other circumstance, these two, they would have hated each other. And I'm not overstating this, but Simon, the Zealot, would have tried to kill Levi. Because that's what zealots did. You're with Rome, I'm going to kill you. Jesus calls Levi, this guy, and he calls Simon the Zealot to be on the same team. So this group that Jesus called to serve as apostles, honestly, were as diverse as one could get. There were at least 4 fishermen, a tax collector, a fired up political guy, and then a few other people that we don't even know much about them and their backstory other than their name. The only thing these guys have in common was their ordinariness. That's it. I think one of the tragic similarities between the first century and the 21st century, really all the centuries in between that, is that where there is diversity, division and disdain are close behind. I've already mentioned this, but I think that's just become so normal that we've accepted it as it can't be anything other than division and disdain when there is diversity. But in Jesus' choosing of the apostles, we learn that if we're going to follow Jesus as Jesus intends to be followed, diversity will lead to unity. As Jesus intends to be followed, where there is diversity, and there's a ton of diversity just sitting here right now, there will not be division and a contemptuousness for one another. There will be diversity, no division, but unity. So let me finish by asking this question. How do we get there? How do we get to a place where we can celebrate and give thanks that we are a diverse community of men and women, but how do we make sure that there isn't division and disdain, but there's actually unity? If you have a pen or you have your phone, please take this note down because it's at least been super helpful to me. Jesus plus mission equals unity. Jesus plus mission equals unity. The central bond that these apostles was not their similarity, and it certainly wasn't their preferences. The central bond was Jesus. That was the central thing that brought these apostles together and bonded them together. And when Jesus is our central bond, there is going to be grace and forbearance and patience and kindness and forgiveness and a ton of space and time to give people to grow into what God is trying to grow into them. You see, when Jesus is our central bond, there is going to be, as Jesus has been to you, we will be to one another. If Jesus is our central bond in the same ways that Jesus has been towards you as he has treated you, you will be towards other people. That's what he intends in our followership. In other words, regardless of our diversity, followers of Jesus will treat others, and not just the men and women in this room, but we will treat others that we work with or live around or study with. We will treat them as Jesus has treated us. So when Jesus is our central bond, there will be unity. But please catch this. It's not just Jesus alone that brings about our unity. Jesus called us to himself to accomplish something. I think sometimes in our church circles, we think it's me and Jesus, me and Jesus. Well, Jesus is our bond together, but it's not just us and Jesus. Jesus gave us a job. He told us to do something. He gave us a mission. Any guesses as to what happened when Jesus and these newly appointed apostles came down from the mountain? Let me read what happened in Luke chapter 6, verse 17. The very next thing that happens when this diverse group of individuals comes down to the mountain. Verse 17, when they came down from the mountain, the disciples stood with Jesus on a large level area surrounded by many of his followers and by the crowds. There were people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from as far north as the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those troubled by evil spirits were healed. Everyone tried to touch him because healing power went out from him, and he healed everyone. As soon as they walk down the mountain with this new role that they've been entrusted with, they are confronted immediately with this beautiful picture of a diverse crowd of men and women who are in need to be served, in need to be loved. They all gathered because they just wanted to hear and be around Jesus. When this group, diverse group, came down the mountain, they were immediately met with, this is the mission, guys. It's people. It's loving them. It's serving them. It's helping them to experience him, being Jesus, his power, his authority. Now, just in case you might be thinking, Michael, Jesus plus mission equals unity. Dude, I'm totally going to tweet that later. That's really good. But just in case you haven't thought about this, that worked really well when Jesus was there. Like, that makes sense that if Jesus, I mean there, like present, you could touch him, see him, hear him. It makes sense that Jesus plus mission would equal unity because he was right there to kind of babysit to make sure that happened. But he's not here. Like, you can't see him. You can't touch him. So that sounds good, but I'm not sure that actually works for us in the 21st century. So I'm not sure if you were thinking that, but those of you who were, and now those of you who are now thinking that, I want to read one text of what happened immediately after Jesus ascended. So Jesus died, rose again on the third day, and after about 40 to 50 days, he ascended back to be with his heavenly Father. That story is told in Acts chapter 1. Here's what happened immediately, starting at verse 12. Then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, a distance of a half mile. And when they arrived, they went to the upstairs room of the house where they were staying. We get a list of names. Here are the names of those who were present: Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, the Zealot, and Judas, son of James. Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, had taken his own life. But verse 14, they all met together and were constantly united in prayer, along with Mary, the mother of Jesus, several other women, and the brother of Jesus. How amazing is that? It says they were all united together. Well, how is that possible? Jesus, central bond, a commitment to the mission that Jesus had entrusted to them. And when Jesus is married to the mission, there will be unity. These individuals, these followers and apostles experience such unity together. Now, I know I say this a lot, and I will not apologize for saying it. I'm going to continue to say it. But one of the reasons that we encourage every single person who would consider Genesis to be their home church, regardless of the season of life that you're in. When I say regardless, I get that some are incredibly busy with work. Some are incredibly busy with family demands. Some are incredibly busy with just young infants who do not allow you to sleep. Regardless of all of those things, we encourage every single person to be engaged and part of a group. Because in a group, we are helping and encouraging one another to make sure that Jesus is truly our central bond. I know we're busy. I know time constrictions. But the reason we encourage you've got to be part of a group is because you can't do it alone. And we need you and you need us. That's the Jesus part of that equation. And the reason that we invite and encourage every single person to serve on a team is so that every single person that God allows your path to cross with, and not just on a Sunday, but at the Super Bowl party you go to tonight, at work tomorrow, at school tomorrow, wherever you are, why we invite people to serve on a team is that your first thought when you see somebody is, I want to serve them. I just want to serve them as Jesus has served me. I want to help that guy. I want to help that lady just experience the love and kindness and generosity of God. And we can do that, not just on a Sunday when we gather, but when we are seeing people everywhere, every day, throughout the week. We are better together. I hope I don't have to work too hard to convince you that we are better together. So let's allow our diversity to show those around us that when you have a Jesus plus mission, it will bring a unity that is so powerful in communicating really the message that God intended, his love for people. I want to finish by reading this one last verse, and this is a verse in the Gospel of John, and it's Jesus speaking, and it's a prayer that he prayed. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. Isn't it amazing in that moment, Jesus, I pray that their preaching would be so powerful. I pray that their music would just be off the hook. I pray that their kids' programs would just be jumping. I pray that they would have unity so that the entire world would know that God loves them. Isn't that crazy? The way that you and I get to express God's love to people who don't believe in God or certainly don't believe that God loves them is the unity that we share together. Jesus plus mission equals unity, and when that happens, the world will know that they are loved by God.